Picture this. You're in Germany, scrolling through a home improvement store online, and you see a small solar panel kit. It's about the size of a large suitcase. You can put it on your balcony, plug it into a standard wall outlet, and it starts reducing your electricity bill. No contractor, no permit, no utility company paperwork. You just buy it, set it up, and it works. And then you think, why can't I do that in America?
That question, why not here, is exactly where today's story starts. And the answer turns out to be more complicated than anyone expected. It's not one law, it's not one agency, it's a web of state rules, product safety standards, electrical codes, and market practices that together made it nearly impossible for Americans to legally buy a product that millions of Europeans already own.
Until Utah decided to do something about it. Welcome to Plug-in Solar Explained from Plug-in Solar US. I'm Lisa. Each episode, we break down the policies, products, standards, and state-by-state changes shaping the future of plug-in solar in America for consumers, renters, homeowners, and anyone who's ever wondered why something this simple is this complicated.
And I'm Mike. Today's episode is part of our Behind the Bill series, the story behind every state law changing plug-in solar in America. We're going deep on Utah, where Representative Raymond Ward sponsored HB 340, the Solar Power Amendments, making Utah the first U.S. state to create a clear, defined legal pathway for small plug-in solar systems. We talked to Rep. Ward directly, and today we're going to walk through everything: the story, the barrier, the compromise, the economics, the safety standards, and what it all means for the rest of the country.
Let's start with a one-sentence version. What did Utah's HB 340 actually do?
At its core, it created a narrow legal exception for a specific type of product, what the law calls a small portable solar generation device. So that product would not be subject to the same utility contract requirements that apply to a full rooftop solar system. The cap is 1,200 watts, or 1.2 kilowatts, and the product has to meet safety standards and comply with the National Electrical Code.
Okay, let's unpack that, because when you say utility contract requirements, most people don't know what that means. What kind of contract are we talking about?
When you install a traditional rooftop solar system, the kind that covers your whole roof, you typically enter into a formal agreement with your utility company. That agreement governs things like net metering, which is when the utility credits you for the excess electricity you send back to the grid. It also covers safety requirements, disconnection procedures, and liability. It's a real legally binding relationship between you and your utility.
Which makes sense for a big system. If I'm sending thousands of watts back onto the grid, the utility needs to know about it.
Exactly. But HB 340 says if your system is under 1,200 watts, meets safety standards, and you're not asking the utility to pay you for any power you export, then you don't need that contract. You're in a completely different category.
And 1,200 watts, how does that compare to what most people think of as solar?
A typical full rooftop installation in the U.S. is somewhere between 5 and 12 kilowatts. So 1,200 watts is roughly 1/10 of the smallest standard rooftop system. We're talking about a product that might power your refrigerator and a few lights. It's not going to take your house off the grid. It's not going to dramatically change your relationship with the utility. It's a consumer appliance that happens to generate electricity.
Which is exactly why the old rules felt so out of proportion.
Right. The rules were written for a technology that was fundamentally different in scale, permanence, and grid impact. Applying them to a 1,200-watt portable device was like requiring a commercial kitchen permit to own a toaster.
Let's talk about how this bill actually came to be. What's the backstory on Rep. Ward? Was he a solar advocate? Did someone come to him with this idea?
Ward is actually a medical doctor by profession. He's not a solar industry insider, and he's not an electrician. He came to this the way a lot of consumers come to it. He saw the product working somewhere else and couldn't understand why it wasn't available here.
Where did he first see it?
Germany. He read about plug-in solar, what the Germans call balcony power plants, and his reaction was immediate. As he told us, it was a product that seemed to be working well. It was a product that I would be interested in having, and yet I couldn't even get it at all in the United States.
And Germany isn't a small test case. This is a massive market.
Not at all. Germany has seen hundreds of thousands of these systems installed in recent years. The product category is well established there. There are safety standards, retail channels, and consumer protections in place. It's a normal consumer product. And Ward looked at that and thought, this should exist here.
So he started digging into why it didn't exist here.
He did, and what he found was not a single federal ban or one agency saying no. It was a patchwork of barriers: state utility rules, the absence of a U.S. product safety standard, electrical code ambiguity, and retail channels that wouldn't stock products without certifications. No single villain, just a system that had never made room for this category.
And his response was to fix the piece he could fix, the state law.
Exactly. He wasn't trying to rewrite the National Electrical Code. He wasn't going to Washington to lobby for a federal standard. He focused on the specific Utah state law barrier that he had the power to address. And he was very clear about his motivation. He told us, I just want the products available. Whatever the consumer wants, they can come get. It was a consumer choice argument, not an environmental mandate.
That framing matters. He wasn't saying everyone should buy solar. He was saying everyone should have the right to buy solar if they want to.
And that's a very different political argument. It's much harder to oppose.
Let's get specific about what the actual barrier was in Utah. You mentioned a utility contract requirement. Walk me through what that meant in practice.
Under Utah state law, if a customer connected any solar generation device to the grid, even a small one, they were generally required to have a formal interconnection agreement with their utility. That's the contract we talked about earlier.
And what does getting that contract actually involve?
For a full rooftop system, it can involve an engineering review, a utility inspection, specific equipment requirements, sometimes months of waiting. It's a real process. And while that process makes complete sense for a large, permanent installation, it was completely disproportionate for a small, portable device.
Because the device isn't doing the same thing to the grid.
Not even close. Ward put it this way. These panels are maybe 1/10 as big as your whole roof full. You are not asking the utility for anything. If you leak a little power onto the grid, the utility is not going to pay you anything. The grid impact is negligible. The power you generate is almost entirely consumed by your own home, and yet the legal requirement was the same.
So the barrier wasn't really about safety. It was about a rule that was written for a different technology.
That's exactly right. And this is actually one of the most important lessons from the Utah story. The barriers to plug-in solar in the U.S. are not primarily about safety. They're about rules that were written before this product category existed. Nobody sat down and said, let's ban balcony solar. They just never made room for it.
Which means the fix isn't about overcoming opposition. It's about updating outdated rules.
In many cases, yes. And Ward's approach was to make that argument clearly and narrowly. Here is the specific rule. Here is why it doesn't apply to this specific product. Here is what we're changing. No more, no less.
Okay, so Ward identifies the barrier and decides to fix it. But utilities don't usually love it when lawmakers start changing the rules around grid connection. How did that conversation go?
Ward was smart about this. He didn't try to run the bill around the utility or catch them off guard. He went to them early, explained what he was trying to do, and asked what their concerns were.
And they had concerns.
They did. Utility engineers met with him, and they came with 3 main conditions. First, no obligation for the utility to pay for any excess power exported to the grid. If your balcony panel sends a few watts back onto the utility lines, the utility keeps it. No credit, no compensation. Second, no utility liability if a customer misuses the product or installs it incorrectly. And third, strict compliance with UL safety standards and the National Electrical Code.
Those sound like pretty reasonable asks, honestly. Ward thought so too. He told us all those caveats were in there because the utility said we will campaign against it unless you put those in. But I agree those were all reasonable things to put in. He wasn't giving away anything he thought was unreasonable. The utility wasn't asking for the bill to be killed. They were asking for guardrails that made sense. And once those conditions were in, the utility stood down?
They did. They did not come to committee to oppose the bill. And without utility opposition, there was very little organized resistance. Ward said, I had a few other people who came and advocated for the bill, but mostly I didn't have any enemies.
The bill passed unanimously in both chambers. That's remarkable for anything energy-related.
It is. But Ward was candid about what that means. He said it didn't necessarily mean every lawmaker had studied plug-in solar deeply. Rather, the bill had a few supporters, reasonable safety conditions, and no strong opposition. That combination is often enough to pass a narrow, well-defined bill. And that may be one of the most important lessons from Utah. The first plug-in solar bill passed not because it solved every issue, but because it focused on one practical barrier and addressed enough concerns to keep key stakeholders neutral.
Let's talk money, because this is where a lot of consumers get stuck. They hear solar and they think big rooftop installation, big upfront cost, long payback period. How does plug-in solar change that math?
The economics are genuinely different, and Ward was very honest about where they stand today versus where they could go. He pointed out that in Germany, consumers in high electricity cost markets might see a payback period of 2 to 2.5 years. That's because German electricity rates are significantly higher than U.S. rates.
How do U.S. rates compare?
It varies a lot by state. Utah is on the lower end, around 11.5 cents per kilowatt hour on average. That's why Ward estimated the payback in Utah might be closer to 10 years under current conditions. But look at a state like New Hampshire, where rates average around 28 cents per kilowatt hour, or Hawaii at over 40 cents. The math looks completely different.
So the same product, the same system, could pay back in 2 years in one state and 10 years in another, just because of electricity rates?
Exactly. And that's why Ward's argument is about consumer choice, not universal economics. He's not saying this makes financial sense for everyone right now. He's saying people should have the right to make that calculation for themselves.
But he also made a point about why U.S. costs are artificially high right now.
This is a really important point. The U.S. costs for plug-in solar systems are currently inflated because the category isn't a normal mass market product yet. You're paying a premium because the supply chain is small, the retail channels are limited, and there are tariff costs layered on top. Ward said if this were being sold as a widespread consumer item without all the other tariff costs and other added costs, those costs also will come down a lot once we start allowing it to be sold.
It's the classic technology adoption curve. Think about LED light bulbs. They were incredibly expensive when they first came out, and now they cost almost nothing.
Or flat-screen TVs, or smartphones. The first generation is always expensive, but once the market scales, costs fall rapidly. Ward's argument is that Utah's law is one of the steps needed to start that scaling process. Even if Utah itself isn't the highest savings market, creating a legal precedent helps build the national market that eventually brings costs down for everyone.
So the payback period today isn't necessarily the payback period in 5 years.
Not at all. And that's why Ward sees this as a long-term market-building exercise, not just a short-term consumer savings story.
Let's say I'm a consumer in Utah or Colorado or Virginia, somewhere this is now legal. I want to buy a system. What should I actually be looking for? Where do I even start?
The first thing to understand is that the specs matter far more than the brand name. This is a category where marketing can be misleading, so you want to evaluate the actual technical specifications. The 3 most important things are panel wattage, battery capacity, and the inverter.
Let's take those one at a time. Panel wattage first.
Panel wattage tells you how much electricity the system can generate under ideal conditions. For a starter system that fits within Utah's 1,200-watt legal cap, you might look at something in the 400 to 1,200-watt range. That's enough to meaningfully offset some of your daily electricity use. Things like keeping your refrigerator running, charging devices, powering lights.
And battery capacity?
Battery capacity, measured in kilowatt hours, tells you how much energy the system can store. This matters a lot if you want to use solar power in the evening when the sun isn't shining, or if you want backup power during an outage. A starter system might have 1 to 2 kilowatt hours of storage. A mid-range system might have 2 to 3 kilowatt hours, which gives you more flexibility.
And the inverter, that's the piece that actually connects to the wall outlet?
Yes, the inverter is the brain of the system. It converts the DC power from the solar panels into the AC power your home uses. And it's the component that interacts directly with your home's electrical system and the broader grid. That's why the inverter's safety certification is the most critical thing to check.
What certifications should people look for?
The most important one right now is UL 3700. That's the specific standard for plug-in photovoltaic products. It was created precisely for this category. If an inverter doesn't carry UL 3700 certification or an equivalent recognized standard, you should not plug it in. Full stop. You should also look for UL 1741, which covers inverters more broadly, and UL 9540 if the system includes battery storage.
And these certifications, are they easy to find on the product?
They should be clearly listed in the product specifications and visible on the product label. If a manufacturer can't tell you clearly what certifications their product carries, that's a red flag.
Let's go deeper on the safety piece, because this is where Ward was really emphatic. He kept coming back to standards. Why are standards so central to this whole story?
Because standards are what make a consumer market possible at scale. Think about how any electrical product gets from a factory to a store shelf. Before a toaster or a lamp or a phone charger reaches a major retailer, it needs to be certified against recognized safety standards. Retailers like Walmart, Home Depot, or IKEA rely on those certifications before they'll stock a product. It's how they manage liability and protect consumers.
And plug-in solar doesn't have that yet, at least not fully?
Not yet at the scale needed. UL has created UL 3700 specifically for plug-in photovoltaic products, and that's a significant step. But Ward said the process still needs to mature into a final, practical certification pathway that manufacturers can actually use at scale. Until that happens, mainstream retailers are unlikely to stock these products widely.
Ward was very direct about this. He said until UL makes a final standard, you won't be able to buy this at Walmart or IKEA.
Exactly, and he pointed to Germany as the model. In Germany, the relevant safety body created a standard for the product category, which gave manufacturers a clear target to build toward, and gave retailers the confidence to stock the products. That's what allowed the market to grow so rapidly there.
So the safety standard isn't the enemy of consumer access. It's actually what enables consumer access.
That's Ward's core argument, and it's a really important reframe. A lot of people in the plug-in solar community see safety standards as obstacles, bureaucratic hurdles slowing down adoption. Ward sees them as the foundation. He said you have to have safety standards in place in order for that to function. Standards give retailers confidence. They give consumers confidence. They give utilities and electricians a common framework. And they give manufacturers a clear target.
And without them, you're stuck with a product that's technically legal in some states, but practically unavailable at normal retail.
Which is exactly where we are right now. You can find products online if you know where to look, but for plug-in solar to become a mainstream consumer category, the kind of thing you pick up at a hardware store, the standards process has to complete.
Let's zoom out, because Ward didn't just talk about balcony panels. He talked about this as a gateway to something much bigger. What's the bigger vision here?
Ward sees plug-in solar as the first step in a much larger shift in how homes connect to distributed energy. If we can establish the principle that a small solar device can safely plug into a home's electrical system without a utility contract, that same principle could eventually apply to larger systems, to batteries, and to other distributed energy products.
He specifically mentioned medium-scale solar systems. What did he mean by that?
He was describing a future where solar systems of various sizes could be installed with dedicated outlets or circuits designed specifically for safe connection, reducing the installation complexity and cost compared to today's full rooftop systems. As he said, with the right safety standards in place, those also could be installed and then plugged in.
That's a fundamentally different model for how solar gets installed. Instead of a major construction project, it becomes more like installing an appliance.
Exactly. And he connected this to batteries as well. In Germany, many of the companies selling plug-in solar also sell batteries. And batteries create a completely different value proposition. They can provide backup power when the grid goes down. That's something a lot of American consumers care deeply about, especially after major weather events.
And then there's the EV angle, which I thought was fascinating.
This is one of Ward's most interesting observations. He pointed out that millions of Americans already own large batteries. They're sitting in their driveways in the form of electric vehicles. But current codes and standards often make it very difficult or impossible to use those EV batteries to power your home during an outage. Ward said people have batteries in their homes all the time in their electric vehicle, which right now they are not allowed to use to power their home during a power outage.
So we have all this distributed energy capacity already sitting there, and we can't use it because the rules haven't caught up?
That's the pattern Ward keeps identifying. The technology exists, the consumer demand exists, but the rules, the codes, the standards, the utility agreements were written for a different era and haven't kept pace.
And he also touched on data centers and AI energy demand.
He did, and he was careful to be realistic about it. AI data centers require power completely out of proportion to ordinary household electricity demand. Some data centers are now considering building their own dedicated power plants. Plug-in solar is not going to solve that problem. But Ward identified one genuine advantage of distributed solar. It produces electricity at the place it is used. He said, plug-in solar doesn't need to build any power lines. You're producing it at the spot you're using it. Every kilowatt hour produced and consumed on site is one less kilowatt hour that needs to travel through transmission lines from a distant power plant.
Let's talk about what other states can learn from Utah. Because Utah was first, but it's not alone anymore. What's the landscape looking like?
The landscape has changed significantly since Utah acted. We're now tracking plug-in solar legislation across all 50 states. Several states have already passed laws: Colorado, Virginia, Vermont, Connecticut, Maryland, Maine, and New Hampshire among them. Others have bills pending, including California, Massachusetts, New York, and New Jersey. And many more are in early stages of discussion.
So Utah opened a door and other states started walking through it.
That's exactly what Ward hoped would happen. He told us every place that talks about it is a little bit more pressure. People need to ask for this in order for the other groups to take action. He saw Utah's role not as defining the final answer for every state, but as proving that a legislature could make room for this category.
But he also said other states shouldn't just copy Utah word for word.
Right. Every state has different utility rules, different electricity rates, different housing stock, and different political dynamics. A state with a lot of apartment renters has different priorities than a state with mostly single-family homes. A state with high electricity rates has a stronger economic argument than a state with low rates. The Utah approach needs to be adapted, not just copied.
And some states are facing more opposition than Utah did.
Significantly more. Utah may have benefited from moving first, before organized opposition had fully formed. Ward acknowledged that some states have faced opposition from utilities, from UL, and from electrical unions. Each of those groups has legitimate concerns that need to be addressed: safety, grid stability, worker protection. The answer isn't to ignore those concerns. It's to engage with them the way Ward engaged with the utility in Utah.
What's his advice to advocates in states where the fight is harder?
Keep pushing on multiple fronts simultaneously. Consumers need to tell their lawmakers they want access to these products. Technical experts need to engage in the standards and code processes. Legislators need to identify and remove the specific state law barriers that apply in their state. And everyone needs to be patient, because this is a multi-year process. As Ward put it, there's just a whole bunch of different little steps to take. But it all starts with people wanting the product and letting their representatives know that they want the product.
Let's wrap this up with the bottom line. 3 takeaways from the Utah story.
Takeaway 1. Utah's HB 340 was narrow by design, and that's why it worked. It didn't try to solve every problem facing plug-in solar. It identified one specific state law barrier, the utility contract requirement, and removed it for one specific product category: small portable solar devices under 1,200 watts. That focus made it possible to build consensus and pass the bill without triggering major opposition.
Takeaway 2. The compromise with the utility was the key to smooth passage. By engaging early, accepting reasonable conditions around liability and payment, and keeping the bill grounded in safety standards, Ward kept the utility neutral. And a neutral utility means no organized opposition. That's a model other states can follow.
Takeaway 3. Laws open the door, but standards get products onto shelves. Utah's law is a necessary first step, but it's not sufficient on its own. For plug-in solar to become a mainstream consumer product, something you can pick up at a hardware store, the industry needs a clear final safety certification pathway. UL 3700 is the foundation. Getting that process to completion is the next critical milestone for the entire plug-in solar movement in the United States.
And Ward's vision for what comes after that is simple. He described it this way. A person walks into a store, sees a product, knows it has passed safety certification pathway, and decides whether it makes sense for their home. No bureaucracy, no utility contract, no permit. Just a safe product, a clear legal pathway, and the freedom for consumers to choose.
That's the goal. And Utah was the first step.
That's it for this episode of Plug-in Solar Explained.
You can read the full interview with Representative Ward, track state-by-state policy updates, and learn more about plug-in solar at pluginsolarus.com. This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It does not constitute legal, electrical, or financial advice. Plug-in solar laws, safety standards, and utility rules vary by state and continue to evolve. Always consult a licensed electrician or qualified professional before installing any electrical product. For the latest information, visit pluginsolarus.com. This episode is part of our Behind the Bill series, the story behind every state law changing plug-in solar in America. New episodes drop as states act, so subscribe wherever you listen.
The simple way to understand plug-in solar, home energy, and the policies shaping America's next consumer energy movement. Thanks for listening.